Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for turning out tonight for the, it's probably the fourth in this series of the BSD Zoom talks. And we always get good turnouts for these, so I'm glad to see that. Anyway, tonight we've invited Andrew Edgar to give us a talk. Many of you may know Andrew, or certainly his wife Grace. She's given talks at the conference in the past. So both of them are active members of the BSD, and it's only fitting that we should ask Andrew to give a talk. And now Andrew's a retired philosophy teacher from Cardiff University. And his interests now in the Dowsing field extend to Earth mysteries and archaeology. And I've noticed he has also written some articles for the Dowsing Today magazine about how his thoughts on how dowsing works. But tonight he wants to he's going to give us a talk on dowsing the spirit of place, as he terms it. So having a sort of developing a conversation with a certain place, and as an example of that, he's chosen the Long Man of Wilmington. This is a giant figure on the steep slopes of Wendover Hill near Wilmington in East Sussex, very near Eastbourne. It's quite familiar. It's a figure holding two staves. And well, I'm very much looking forward to hearing what he has to say about this. But rather than me waffle on, I think it's best that we let Andrew explain his thoughts on the subject. So, thank you very much for the talk, Andrew, and over to you.
Right, Nick. Well, thanks to you and the BSD for the invitation. And well, I hope it's going to be interesting. What I'm going to do now is do a screen share. So I'm going to PowerPoint. The main point of the PowerPoint is to get some nice pictures while I'm talking. So let me get the right one. It should be that. Now, can everyone see basically a title page with my name and my email address?
That's right. Clear here.
I see some nodding. Good. Okay, right.
Yes.
So what we talked about, as said, was dowsing the spirit of the place. And really what this is a personal account of how I approach a dowsing project. And I'm going to illustrate it with basically this ongoing conversation I'm having with the Long Man of Wilmington. As Nick said, Grace and I used to run a dowsing group in Cardiff. I used to work in Cardiff. About a year ago, a little over a year ago, we moved to East Sussex. And so we're now beginning to explore this new and in many ways mysterious and ancient landscape. And yes, one of the most obvious ancient objects in that landscape is the Long Man. Right, now let me get my page go down. Come on, behave. Oh, there we go. Right. And there's a picture there by Eric Revilius, who's one of the sort of great Sussex artists. He grew up in Eastbourne, working in the between the wars period. And that's a woodcut he did of inspired by, let's put it that way, the Long Man. Now, let's focus for a moment on dowsing. And I'm sure that all of us as good members of the BSD were taught when we go dowsing that one of the first things we should do is ask three questions. We ask the question, can I? Which is basically asking, am I able to dowse today? Am I up to dowsing this particular site? Should I? Which is really asking, is it appropriate for me to dowse? Are there going to be any bad consequences, either for myself or for anyone else? And so is it, if you like, sort of morally, pragmatically okay to go ahead with my dowsing? Then that final question, may I? That's the crucial one for me. For me, that is asking permission of the site I'm dowsing. It's that moment of respect. When you go to a site, you don't just sort of march in, for me, and begin dowsing. You take at least a moment to introduce yourself. I would actually positively rehearse in my head why I'm there, what I want to do, express my good intentions. And I suppose also what I'm doing is allowing a moment for the place, its spirit, its guardian, to recognize me, to acknowledge me. So my dowsing is really ready to begin when I get a yes to that may I question. And one of the things I've noticed is, and I found this very much with the Long Man, is the can I question got, it's sort of straightforward, yes, you can. The should I, again, got a straightforward, yes, you can. The may I, it got a much more vigorous rotation of the pendulum. And you almost felt you were getting that invitation, yes, the place is actually pleased you're there. It's pleased you're taking an interest in it. So that's my first step. Let's show the respect. I expect, just step to one side for a moment. What we mean by the spirit of place, the genus loci, it's the assumption that a place has a certain consciousness, a certain character, a certain sort of individuality. I know Adrian Incledon Weber actually separates the guardian of the place from the spirit of the place, and sees the guardian as tied up with, in a way, the spirituality of the place, whereas the spirit is actually more tied to the physicality of it. I'm not sure I make that distinction. In a way, I just feel a personality, and I'm talking to that personality, I'm engaging with that personality, and I need to show it respect. The danger of not showing it respect, I think, is a place can have a trickster element. A place can play tricks on you. It can mess up your dowsing. If you're overconfident, if you're getting results which are a little too good to believe, that might actually be the trickster stepping in and just bringing you down a peg or two. So I think it's important to respect, just so the spirit won't play around with you. Now, my next question, typically, and I'm going to drop names. I know Maria Wheatley uses this question as well. What do you want to show me? Now, there may be times when you go dowsing, especially, for example, if you're a professional dowser looking for water, where you want to be shown a specific thing. So show me the drinkable water, show me the site for the well, whatever. But unless you've got some specific project, I do this. What do you, the spirit of the place, want to show me? The response then is typically holding one dowsing rod, allow that dowsing rod to point in a certain direction, and then start walking in that direction. And basically what will happen is the dowsing rod won't necessarily take you in a straight line. It will take you on a little bit of a walk. That walk can be important. Notice what's going around you. Eventually, the dowsing rod simply starts rotating or walking you around in a circle, and then you know you've got to where the spirit of the place wants you to be. You've then got the big challenge of working out why it wants you to be there. Sometimes that challenge, and most times that challenge, is easily answered. I remember once, this time last year, I was dowsing on top of the South Downs, and there's lots of Bronze Age burial barrows there. And I'd stopped at what I thought was a group of 2 interesting barrows, asked my permissions, then asked, what do you want to show me? And I, of course, assumed that what it wanted to show me was that great big barrow, which was the spectacular one and was obviously the interesting one. Instead, my rod turned away from that and walked me to what seemed to be just a little depression in the ground. Little bit disappointed, I looked around and then it twigged. I was actually standing in another dug out barrow. And when I looked properly, I saw there weren't 2 barrows there. There's actually a group of 6. And it was sort of the spirit of the place saying, right, okay, there's this big barrow here. Yeah, right, now let's look at the place properly. We're going to dowse properly. Now look at it again. And that is really encouraging engagement. you feel you're actually now beginning to work with the spirit of the place. What you're doing is, as I put there on the note, it's going to be not just for your interest, but it's in the interests of the place itself. And I'll spell this out a bit more as we go along. But another way of looking at this question is to say, I'm asking the spirit of the place to tell me a story, not just to show me something, but I'm almost asking, what aspect of your long history do you want to relate to me and allow me to tell to others? So in a sense, what I'm going to be doing today is telling you a story about the Long Man of Wilmington. And I hope a story that the Long Man itself and that Windover Hill and the Downs want me to tell you. If you're wondering about the picture there, this was photographed above the Long Man. I don't know if you can see my cursor there. I'm sort of rotating a cursor. Is it visible? But that, there's a little bit of white there. That's actually the Long Man. So that's the head of the Long Man. But what you're doing is looking down to the village of Wilmington. And there's a priory, a church, and also a 1600-year-old yew tree in the church. So you've got an incredibly ancient site here. I'll say more about the situation of the Long Man as we go along. Right, this question, what do you want to show me? Take it a little bit further. It's really about what the spirit wants to show you. So my assumption is that the spirit is going to recognize in me possibly certain talents, certain interests, certain knowledge, certain dowsing skills, certain intuitions. And so it's going to actually end up telling me something about myself. That story, when I finally unfold it, will tell me something about, if like, things which matter to me. And it might make me a little bit more self-aware, a little bit more aware of what I am as a dowser and what I can bring to dowsing. So, as I said, this is very much a conversation. It's a two-way conversation. The spirit hopefully is going to use me, I'm going to use the spirit, and both of us are going to be, I hope, enriched by the circumstance. The picture there, this is actually, again, above the Long Man. You're looking actually towards Beachy Head there. This is a hawthorn, which is sitting next to a very spectacular long barrow up on the hill. And it was one of those things that when I asked, what do you want to show me? I was drawn to this hawthorn. And it does seem this hawthorn is almost in part an embodiment of the spirit of the place. Very interesting energy or communication lines come away from it, engage with the barrows and other features of the landscape. And for me, this hawthorn has its own personality. And again, I shall say more about hawthorns, if I remember, as we go along. One other thing to take account of, in case you wonder, yeah, what's it done? Right. And again, the picture, you can just see the Long Man. I'm standing on its left-hand side. One other thing to take account of is day signs. This is an idea from Stig Lonergan in his book, Spiritual Dowsing. And Stig Lonergan says, one of the things you should look out for when you're dowsing is really anything which catches your attention, seems to be a bit out of the ordinary, a bit unusual. He says, in a way, they're a bit like images from dreams, but you experience them when you're awake. And I find those very important. Again, I remember one time I was dowsing in Pembroke, right near St. David's Head. And I was dowsing a cromlech, an ancient burial mound, called, as many are around there, King Arthur's Stone. And while I was standing there, 4 choughs, like those blackbirds with the long red beaks, very spectacular birds, descended onto this cromlech. And as I discovered later, the chough is actually Arthur's bird. So Arthur's bird descended onto Arthur's Stone and basically reassured me I was in the right place at the right time, get on with it. So moments like that can often reassure your dowsing. They can often, as we'll see later, add to how you understand a place. And for me, this is very much, I'm one of those dowsers who likes to make sense of things, to find a story, a meaning. I'm not really a dowser who's terribly into sort of documenting energy lines or measuring their strength or anything like that. I think there's an important point for that. But I'm much more into getting this story out of the place. And day signs are often a great clue as to what's going on. Now, one other thing which shapes my dowsing is this idea from Tom Graves and Liz, I shall risk pronouncing her name, Pora Wilczynska. I think that's about right. My wife is grimacing at this moment, my appalling Polish pronunciation, but still. They have a wonderful book called The Disciplines of Dowsing, which if you haven't read, I very strongly advise you to read. It's a great book. And it's got, they suggest that dowser needs basically 4 skills. And the first skill is that you as a dowser are a mystic. And what they mean by that is just having confidence in the fact that you can dowse. Remember those times when your dowsing has uncannily worked. They reassure you, have conviction. And in a way, it's also sort of putting to one side those doubts that the rational, scientific 21st century mind is sort of niggling away at. No, dowsing works, you can dowse. Your pendulum, because you just asked the question, has told you you can dowse. Have that confidence. That's your first step. The second, which for me is often the most important, is the dowser as an artist. And if you look at Liz's website, she's very good at producing images, especially paintings of sites they have been dowsing, and some wonderful images there. But it's also for me very much about experiencing the site. Often when I first visit a site to dowse, I won't actually do any dowsing. I will look at the site. I will walk around it. I will smell it, the scent of grass or hay or anything. Listen to it. Sounds of birdsong, sound of traffic, sound of the wind in the trees, whatever. Feel the gradient of the land under your feet. How easy is it to walk over? So I spend a lot of time just wandering around looking. What I'll often do is take photographs. I will do little sketch maps. I will do little drawings. Really just getting myself familiar with it. Again, it's that sort of first sight and me getting to know each other. And it's often from that artistic moment, that experiencing, that perceiving, that I begin to get an idea of why I might be called to the site, why I might do something useful in it. Also, at first, it can actually be very confusing. The stories that sites have to tell us tend to unfold quite slowly. So it's not something you can rush. It's not something you can expect an instant answer to. So it's taking that patience to spend a half hour. I remember Grace and I, with our dowsing group in Lewis, took them to a place called Baxter's Field in Lewis and insisted that for the first half hour, they did not touch their dowsing rods or their pendulums. You spend the first half hour looking, listening, sensing, getting used to the site. Then you can dowse. And the painting, by the way, there is by me. So also, in a way, it's part by me. So in a way, part of my dowsing is also doing drawings, doing paintings of the sites I'm engaging with as another way to experience them and learn about them and carry on that conversation. What about a dowser as scientist? 2 things here. One is to be methodical. You know, I can say it. So take notes, record what you're seeing. Make sure you do have that notebook, which is jotting down all the important stuff. Get it written up if you can. The other thing is an informed approach, as I put it there. Read what other dowsers have written or told you, or listen to what other dowsers have got to tell you. And dowsers will have a lot to tell you about the Long Man of Wilmington, as I know from experience, and I shall pick up on some of that soon. But also, what in a case like the Long Man have folklorists said? What's the folklore of the area? What have archaeologists said? What have the historians said? What even have the geologists said? There's actually quite interesting stuff about soil creep, because the soil on the hillside is actually slipping down the hill, stuff like that. You might also want the harder natural sciences. I don't find a great deal of use for physics or chemistry or stuff like that. I was trained in the social sciences and humanities rather than the natural sciences. So my approach tends to come from things like archaeology, cultural anthropology, history, folklore. But it's worth having that approach. And one of the things that I've said that what I'm doing with the Long Man of Wilmington is having a dialogue with the spirit of the place. I'm also finding myself having a dialogue with certain people who've either written about the Long Man, who've written about hill figures. Two key figures in Dowsing. One is Guy Underwood, who wrote The Pattern of the Past. The other one is Tom Lethbridge, who wrote a number of books, including one called Gog Magog and another called Witches, about hill figures and beliefs. I'll say a little bit more about them later. I know some of you were at a talk I gave this time last week and know everything I've ever thought about either of those two characters. For those of you who weren't, don't worry, I don't presume that, but some of you have got kind of slightly different perspective on this. The last thing, you're a magician. This is Tom Grave's wonderful phrase for just making a practical difference. Make sure that your dowsing actually matters. And that bit of mattering can be just, it matters to you. It's told you something that you wouldn't have otherwise understood about the world, about yourself. I'm hoping that my dowsing matters to the spirit of the place. It opens up at least one of the stories that the spirit of place wants to be told. So it is important to just keep an idea of, I want something to come out of this. I'm not just sort of pootling around the field. I'm going to make a small difference somehow. Now, let's say something about the Long Man itself. So here's a couple of photographs of the Long Man, which is a classic image, as Nick was saying, a figure of, we shall say a man, a human being, standing with two long poles, standing upright, more or less symmetrical, but both of the feet point to the left as we're looking. Say more about the feet later. The picture on the left-hand side is as you walk up to the Long Man, there's a nice long walk from the car park. So you get this kind of approach. The picture on the right is coming slightly from the right-hand side. So also notice how you see the play of light across the hillside. The hill faces north, so it doesn't get a lot of light, but it's on a slope of about 35 degrees. Believe you me, when you walk up onto the hill above, you're walking up a slope. But the slope is kind of shallow enough to get sunlight, at least at this time of year, through a decent part of the day. You can also see there, especially in the left-hand picture, that the hill it's on is a sort of slightly which way around? It's concave, it's sticking out a bit. So it bulges out slightly. And it's almost in a sort of a slightly triangular shape. So it is sort of framed by the hills on either side of it. So it's very much a place which is sort of crying out for you to do something with it and carve a figure on it, perhaps. Now, what does that figure look like? We've just seen the modern Long Man, but here, I think in a way it's an important point for understanding a Long Man, but an important point for dowsing in general. What we are seeing is a figure which was finally put in place in 1969. It is not strictly a chalk figure, although the hill it's built on is a chalk hillside. The Sussex Downs are chalk downs. The Long Man is actually made of concrete bricks. So it's strictly a concrete brick man, was a chalk man. Before 69, it was made from yellow bricks, which had been put in place in 1874. Now, 1874 was in a sense the big restoration. What had happened is some of those Victorian bricks had got frankly stolen, presumably as souvenirs, I think. And so in 69, it was decided to renovate the Long Man and make sure that those new concrete slabs could not be easily removed. The problem is, or the immediate question is, how authentic was that Victorian restoration, the 1874? And we've got some earlier drawings. As you can see, the earliest known drawing of the Long Man came from 1710. And they're, in a way, quite a different figure, a much chubbier figure, standing between the two poles still, feet going out in opposite directions, notice, and legs quite wide apart. The diagram B there is a classic one by William Burrell of sort of late 18th century, and Burrell has given the figure a face. Notice we haven't got a face anymore, it's got a face, but it also seems to be holding a hoe in one hand and a scythe in the other. It also seems to have hair. Get a bit later still, the hair seems to disappear, the hoe and scythe disappear, so we've just got poles, legs are still, feet are still sticking out, but we've kind of got a V-neck collar. Finally, the V-neck collar disappears. The figure seems to acquire eyes again, but also has got hair or possibly a hat or a helmet. Some people have suggested that it's a helmet equivalent to the sort of helmet which was discovered at Sutton Hoo. So a kind of Saxon warrior's helmet. Now, I think one thing's here, there's also one other thing. Around about 1800, a bit earlier, it was not the Long Man at all, it was the Green Man. The turf on the hillside here is actually very deep. So it seems that the Long Man was never dug down to the chalk bedrock. So it was never, before the modern concrete, a white, seemingly chalk man. It was a figure dug into the turf. And you saw the figure really when the sun cast a shadow across it, and you saw the shadow of the ditches of the line rather than seeing the white. Now, that might be significant. You know, that might have actually mattered because maybe you were only supposed to see the Long Man at a certain time of the year or under a certain light. I've also noticed one of the things with just walking around the Long Man, it's quite interesting when you're walking up the sides, how quite a lot of the outline disappears even now, because the modern concrete blocks are actually quite low to the ground. So when you walk up, you only see fragments of the outline. And that's quite an interesting experience. And you kind of, your mind puts in the rest, but when you look closely, you realize that you're only seeing little bits of it. Rodney Castleton, who wrote a great book on this, simply called The Wilmington Giant. I've got a reading list at the end of this, by the way, and I'll ask Nick or Richard to pass my PowerPoint around anyone who's interested. But Castleton suggests that on the right as what the Long Man actually looked like prior to the Victorian Restoration. So in a way, a slightly racier figure. A number of the people who described the Long Man in early Victorian times talk of it as walking down the hill towards you. And Castleton's reconstruction has the figure putting its weight on its right leg. Also, something like a hat still above the head there. As I said, that would have been probably a figure carved in the turf rather than a figure outlined clearly in chalk. So, important thing, the figure of the Long Man has probably been changing over history. My suspicion is that there's been a figure on that hillside for a very long time, probably pre-Roman, maybe going back Iron Age or Bronze Age, but it may not have been the figure we now see. And I think that's one thing it's worth remembering for almost any dowsing. When you go into an ancient site, it will have changed a lot. I know, thinking that asking the question in my local church, when did they finish building this church? And if your dowsing is really up to scratch, you'll get the answer 2022, because we put in a new flooring last year. Okay, that pillar you're standing next to, that dates from the 14th century, and that's probably what you expected. But something like a church is continually being built and rebuilt, and bits are being added on. And you think of something even like Stonehenge. Stonehenge goes through at least 3 different phases. Stones are brought in, moved around, taken away again, brought back. Things are continually changing. And I think the Long Man is something which changes. And that is, in a way, I think, important to its story, as we'll see. Now, where is the Long Man? There's the Ordnance Survey map, and there is the Long Man. Just south of the village of Wilmington, you've got the village of Alfriston, due, which way is that? West. The clergy house is the first property brought by the National Trust, claim to fame. You're also on, obviously, the South Downs. So that sort of Ridley line in part follows the route of the South Downs Way, but it's also trying to suggest the top of the South Downs. So you've got that north-facing escarpment, if you like, and those sort of very steep hills. And the Long Man is on that. Right up in the top left-hand corner there, you'll notice you've got Firle Beacon. And that is also a spiritually very powerful place. Grace and I are taking some members of our dowsing group out there on Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock, if anyone's in the area. And we're going to do some dowsing there. And I think there is a relationship between the Long Man and Firle Beacon, which I haven't quite worked out yet as part of the ongoing conversation. So it's situated on a very spectacular site. One of the other things you'll notice is above it, there's an awful lot of stuff going on. So you've got this map here again from Rodney Castleton. It's actually from an earlier author, Kerwin, to give his due. And just to highlight a couple of things here, there's a strange little platform north of, beneath the Long Man. And nearly every dowser who's been there has picked up very strong energies at that site. It is also the site where the local druids apparently hold festivals or rituals 8 times a year for each of the key points of the Celtic year. And so in a way, you've got a question about whether the energy comes from the druids giving it energy, or whether it is primarily an energetic site. The official explanation is that that platform actually comes as a side result of the quarrying. But it seems to be too powerful, too important for that. And it does attract people. You can see just people who are looking at the Long Man sort of sit down there for their picnics or whatever. So you've got a mysterious point there. Also above the Long Man, up on this Windover Hill, as it's called. And as someone pointed out to me, it's not called Windover Hill for no reason. Like most of the downs, it's incredibly windy up there. It's actually a very difficult place to douse because it's often so windy you can't hold your dowsing rods still. You kind of need those big Hamish Miller cast iron dowsing rods. But you've got interesting stuff there. You've got this enormous long barrow. You've got flint barrows. You've got a round barrow. If you look at it on that diagram at the top right hand, you've got another powerful big barrow, hunter's barrow up there. You've got other flint mines. You've got these roads, some of which are thought to be Roman. So there's all sorts of stuff going on here. There's all sorts of energies going on. There's also, I point out, a lot of hawthorn bushes. And it's noticeable if you ask, what do you want to show me? Quite often you can end up in the middle of a hawthorn bush. And they do seem to be sort of important spiritual places, part of the sort of guardianship of the place. And Guy Underwood, Dowser does point out that hawthorns often grow over blind springs as well, so I suspect they're sort of nodally important. Now, Grace and I, as part of Lewis Dowsing group, if you run through the U3A, Grace took a group out to Wilmington to do some dowsing. I was otherwise engaged. I was actually in Malta, yeah, but that's another story. Oh, sorry, I've got one more map. Oh, bye. Quickly, this map as well. These are the leys. The north-south one is kind of the official ley, and you'll find that in Paul Devereux's Ley Hunter's Guide. And that's very much dowsable energy. The last time I was at Long Man, which was about a fortnight ago, the field in front of it had recently been cut, so it's just stubble, so you could get onto it easily. And you can pick up that north-south line quite clearly with your dowsing rods. There's also a dead straight line going from Alfriston Church to Folkington Church, which goes through basically the Long Man and those barrows above it. So it's a sort of crossing point of very powerful lines, very powerful energies here. And also, just as a quick aside, Alfred Watkins in The Old Straight Track thought that the Long Man of Wilmington was his dodman. That was his person who actually laid out ley lines, and the dowsing, those two rods, were actually his surveying poles. I like that image, so we'll keep that one in there as well. Now, go back to what I was talking about. As I said, Grace took a group up to the Long Man and did some dowsing there, and also encouraged them to do some remote dowsing afterwards. So it was sort of kind of experience the site and then go away and do some remote dowsing. And I'll take just of the examples of dowsing because we've got wonderfully consistent results. So Eleanor Alston here came up with this lovely photograph and diagram. She found these 4 clear energy lines, 2 energy lines going down through the rods. So that would correspond to the north-south ley line that Paul Devereux found. And as I said, if you go onto that field, now it's in stubble, you can pick up those lines and that ley very clearly. But also, Eleanor got those lines going across, and I haven't picked up those in the field yet because I wasn't looking for them. But next time I'll go back, I'll try and find them. And I do wonder if those link into that other east-west ley. So that's something I've got to go to investigate. Again, one of our other dowsers, Ron Potok, again produced this glorious photograph. Lovely image of the Long Man. You can see it very clearly. You can also see the quarry to the right there. But again, Ron found, again, those 2 energy lines going down the hill through the rods, the staves. Ron found an additional line going down the center. And I have found those 3 on the ground. Other dowsers have also found further lines between the center and the outside lines. So a group of 5. So it's obviously a very complex line going through here. Grace suggested the very nice idea, so that if you like a variation on Alfred Watkins, that in a way, laying out the Long Man, if you like, the people who were laying it out were showing off that they could dowse, that those 2 staves were showing that we have dowsed these energy lines, this is where they are. So it's a kind of demonstration of that sensitivity to the earth energies. And I think that's actually very important because I think those staves are probably the oldest part of the site. And they're very stable, long-lasting. One person suggested that those energies which are going down the site are probably something like 6,000 years old. So that's good enough for me to say they're a permanent part of the site. So the figure of the Long Man might be changing, but you've got that very permanent energy, which is actually being drawn and redrawn upon. Now, what happens next? I decided, well, I was asked by Grace to do some remote dowsing of the site. And I was reading Underwood's Pattern of the Past. And this is from Underwood, one of the most famous examples of a bit of dowsing of a chalk figure. And Underwood dowsed the Uffington horse in Oxfordshire. And as I'm sure most people know, Uffington is where the Michael and Mary lines and the Belinus lines cross. So it's incredibly powerful. But it's got this beautiful chalk carving. And it's also chalk carving that, unlike the Long Man, you are actually allowed to walk across. Also, it's not on that steeper slope. So it's a relatively easy one to douse. Underwood dowsed it and found that there were what he calls aquastats, or earth energy, what he calls earth force, geodetic lines underlying it. And his argument was that a horse had been carved to mirror those geodetic lines and reflect them. So in a way, the horse is a projection making explicit the earth energies. But also, Underwood wondered, well, is it really a horse? Doesn't it look more like a dragon? I know one person recently suggested to me it actually looks like a cat, and I quite like that. But the idea of a dragon, it's next to Dragon Hill. So why do we insist on calling it a horse? Underwood's dowsing gave an idea, because he found that there were more energy lines there than were actually carved. And you can see those D and E images gives, if you like, the shape of a horse. And Underwood's suggestion is sometimes the Uffington figure is carved as a dragon, as it is now. At other times, all the aquastats, the energy lines, are taken into account of, and it's drawn as a horse. But it keeps that name of being a horse. Now, inspired by this, I thought, what I'll do, I'll dowse the Long Man. And of course, what I'm going to come up with is a beautiful diagram like Underwood's, and I'll be able to tell you definitively what the original shape of the Long Man was. And that'll settle everything. And this is what I got on the left there. Nothing like Underwood whatsoever. What I got was these, if you like, peculiar squiggles. As you see, I've got two lines going down the main figure, not crucially corresponding to the staves. The two lines go down and end in spirals. Then I got these much more elaborate patterns over the body, and especially focusing on the head of the Long Man. Great. So what's going on here? So in a way, this is part of this conversation with the spirit of the place. This is what the spirit wanted to show me. It wanted to show me this, what I'm going to call a glyph, after Hamish Miller. Hamish Miller's glyphs were quite small. This is very big. But in a way, the spirit of the place is communicating with me. It's talking to me by showing me this diagram. Okay, makes sense to this. Now, one thing it sort of reminded me of was an excavation that Tom Lethbridge did at Wendlebury Hill in Cambridgeshire. I think the BSD or a related group has an outing to do archaeology and dowsing to Wendlebury in October, which I'm thinking of going along and joining, if only to get at this hill. Lethbridge didn't find this figure by dowsing. He found it actually by putting a long and apparently quite dangerous metal pole into the soil, testing soil resistance, and was sort of identified the figure by its resistance. I say it's Wendlebury, and for Lethbridge, it's an image of what he calls in his book Magog, which for him is the earth goddess, the female deity, which is almost sort of pan-European, but certainly ancient English, British religion. And he develops that in his book on witches. It's the figure which is worshipped in witchcraft as he sees it. Now, there's another link here. There was an article in Folklore, respected academic journal, back in the late 70s by someone called Jacqueline Simpson. And Jacqueline Simpson suggested that the word Wilmington is actually a corruption of Wendelhelm. And so that the figure on Wilmington Hill is actually the same figure that Lethbridge found on Wandlebury Hill. They're both Wandle, whoever Wandle was. So maybe what we're looking at here is the same deity. So again, as I said, this sort of process of dowsing is that conversation with the spirit of the place, but also the spirit of the place drawing on the stuff that I'm interested in, that I'm reading. It kind of knows that I'm using Underwood. It knows that I'm reading Lethbridge. It's drawing that into our conversation. Take it on a bit further. One of the sort of intuitions I got when I first tried to dowse the Long Man was that I'm missing out the dimension of time. I got a series of lines which really didn't make any sense, wasn't telling me anything important. And I think it was the spirit of the place sort of nudges me on the shoulder and says, look at this historically. This thing changes over time. Do some dowsing for different points of time. And so I did that sort of map dowsing exercise, firstly for roughly the Middle Ages. It gave me around about sort of 1400. And as you see now, the lines are much simpler. I've just got these rather bleak lines. I've got sort of interesting spiral there wandering about. And I've just got a circle around the head where, as you saw previously, I had a rather interesting group of spirals. So something's happened here. It's almost as if some of the significance, the power, has gone out of the site. So that's my Middle Ages. But then it pushed me back even further. Have a look at the Roman and pre-Roman periods. And for the Roman period, it gave me this much more interesting pattern, working over the shoulders, focusing on the throat towards the head of the figure. Again, a stress, these wouldn't have necessarily been carved on the hill. This is sort of the energy through which the hill is communicating. But also the spirit of the site decided that it was not going to spare my blushes. This was a site that was going to embarrass me, because it also gave me this little figure you'd see down at the crotch, as we'll call it, between the legs of the long, in scare quotes, man. Is this actually a long woman? I began to think this. If you stand at the modern car park, you're at a nice distance from the Long Man and you see a tall, thin, possibly male figure. But it's not like the Sir Nabis giant. It's not got anything blatant about it. As you walk along that path towards it, the figure becomes shorter, squatter, because of the foreshortening, but also its hips and its waist become more exaggerated. And so it becomes a more female figure. So maybe this Long Man is actually deliberately androgynous, or it deliberately shifts between a male appearance and a female appearance. Now, in a way, I pushed that a bit further by thinking about the gender, the masculinity, the femininity of the site. And I got very much the feeling that the energy line, and therefore the stave on the left-hand side, is female, the right-hand side is male. Similarly, the lines typically are female on the left, the glyphs, male on the right. So if you like, that Roman image of the shoulders coming together on the head is male and female lines conjoining, overlapping each other. Go a bit further. So the east is female, the west, male. One of the things that Lethbridge is talking about is an original creator female goddess, Magog, Diana, Hecate, the goddess of the thorn bush, and I kept seeing those hawthorns. But also that female goddess would have a male counterpart. So maybe something like that is going on here. Maybe this site is actually about this bringing together of the male and female principles. It's about that meeting of male and female. If you like got the strong, upright, supporting, fertilizing male who you see from the distance, and the fertile, earth-giving, earth mother, goddess, actually on the hill as you get closer. But remember about day signs. I said it was important to look at day signs. Well, I noticed last time I was there, as I was walking up to do my dowsing, there were two deer, I think they were deer, in a field, which kind of catches your attention, not the sort of thing you see every day. So two deer peacefully in the field. Also, very spectacularly, there were two buzzards obviously hunting over the ridge as I was walking up, and they're absolutely still in the air. You just saw these birds' mastery of the air currents, absolutely still, staring down, looking for their prey on the hill. And then when I'd walked over the top of the hill, on those Roman roads, past all those barrows, I noticed lots of butterflies, which, again, that's nice. And then I realized lots of these butterflies, especially the common blues and some of the gatekeepers, were flying in pairs. And kind of eventually the penny drops. Again, it's the spirit of the place nudging you on the shoulder. Look, everything comes in twos. Pair of mammals, pair of birds, pairs of insects. So is this place, as some people have suggested, not just about the male and female coming together, but maybe it's about fertility. It is about the fertility of the landscape. But then I got my final nudge of a day sign. I had finished dowsing, and next to the car park, well, I keep talking about the car park. I'd actually cycled there. I'd done a 10-mile cycle ride to get there. And I wish the car park, if anyone from Wilmington Heritage or whatever is there, can we have a bicycle rack in the car park? So I'd cycled there, and before cycling my 10 miles home against the wind, I decided I'd sit down and have my cheese sandwich and my flask of tea, proper bagging. And there's a little bit of a mound next to the car park in this grassy place. And I sort of rested against a tree, and I thought I was looking at a Long Man, and there was this tree in front of me. Then I realized that someone had actually carved on the tree, and carved quite elaborately. And I looked closely, and what they'd written, it's actually a lyric from a song by Neil Young, Harvest Moon. And still in love with you on this harvest moon. Right, at this point, you can either be kind of annoyed that people go around carving on nice trees, or you can think, is this another day sign? Is this the spirit of the place trying to tell me something? And this is actually a rather beautiful phrase. Is this, again, this place not just about fertility, but about commitment? I'm still in love with you as the moons, the seasons, the cycles, the years change. So you've got this idea of commitment. And remember, the Long Man is something which those glyphs keeps changing. The Long Man itself, I think, has been carved and recarved over millennia, but you've also got that stability of the energy lines. You've got that stability of the staves. So maybe the Long Man is about stability amongst change. And maybe ultimately it is about hope. It's an image of hope. It's as everything in the world seems to change about us, we can still love not just each other, but love the Long Man, love the Downs, commit ourselves to this glorious landscape, and also maybe commit ourselves to the ancient goddess that Lethbridge talks about in The Witches. And Lethbridge is inspired by the work of Margaret Murray. And if you've not yet read it, the current issue of Fortean Times has a lovely article on Margaret Murray and her account of witchcraft cults. So anyway, that's as far as I've got with my dowsing. As I say, it's an ongoing conversation. There is one bit which is troubling me. There is a folk story which says that there were two giants, one that lived at the Long Man, one that lived at Firle Beacon, remember I referred to earlier, they had a fight, and the Firle Beacon Long Man won and killed the Wilmington giant. And that is the giant's body laid out on the hillside. Now, I think Tom Lethbridge would come along at this point and say, well, that's a story of the patriarchal male religion coming along and crushing, destroying the female religion. It's the male god defeating the female goddess. Well, you know, that for Lethbridge is also a challenge to us to bring that female goddess back to life. I wonder if it also sort of does reflect a certain tension between those two sites, which I need to look at and look at that story, which not just these two sites, but this part of the Downs has got to tell. So the spirit of the place expands. But I will stop, and I am going to stop, with just a couple more images from which have sort of lurked in the background. I'm a great fan of Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is the co-author with Terry Pratchett of Good Omens, amongst many other wonderful things. He also wrote a comic book series called Sandman. And if you go to issue 19, you'll find this wonderful image of the Long Man as the portal to fairy, to the land of the fairies. And the story in that issue is that Shakespeare first performs Midsummer Night's Dream in front of the Long Man to an audience of real fairies. And the play is about us being there to remember the fairy folk. And I suppose in some ways that is one of the things I'm trying to do with this bit of dowsing, is it's to remember the grey folk, remember the spirits, the elementals of these places we douse. But just two last images to finish off. There's another lovely watercolour this time by Eric Revilius. Also notice that element of melancholy in the picture. It's a long man behind barbed wire. Now, Long Man is technically today fenced off. There's a fence at his feet to stop you going up there, and there's a fence at the top to stop you coming down. But you can get in from the side. It's not fenced at the side. My claim is always, if you want to douse the Long Man and get on site, wear a high-vis jacket and a hard hat, and no one will challenge you, because you can do anything, providing you're wearing a hard hat, no high-vis jacket in this country. The image on the other side by Moffat Ward, I came across this recently. There's a wonderful art gallery in Eastbourne, the Townley. I came across this engraving, I think it is. He's obviously exaggerated the tilt of the hill, the gradient of the hill, but in a way he's captured the sort of curve, the vitality of the Downs. This wonderful sense of fecundity of a body they've got. But I also think he gives a sort of sense of almost something Egyptian, and kind of makes sense of those two legs pointing, those 2 feet pointing the same way. And so that is also, I think, a nice inspiring image. And I think those things are all part of our conversation with the spirit of the place. Artists have had their own conversations, and we can benefit from those. So I'm going to stop there. If you want, I'm more than happy to answer questions, or we debate amongst yourselves about how I go about dowsing, but also about the Long Man. So, and there are some of the books which have inspired me and helped me. And I said, if Richard or Nick want to pass these, I can pass these slides on to them. And if they want to pass them around, that would be great.
Okay.
I shall stop sharing now. I'm happy. And talk to you.
Thank you, Richard. Sorry, Andrew. Sorry, beg your pardon.
I'm also going to put a light on.
Thank you very much. Yes, well, we will after this. I was making an edited version of every talk, and we always add it to the YouTube channel so that you can watch the talk again later. And in the links there, we'll put links to your slides if you'd let me have a copy.
More than happy to. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. But yeah, I've got a real sense if you're. Well, I could see why you used to teach philosophy. I think you'd love to play with ideas too. And I can see that this man's going to draw you back again and again. I don't think you'll ever. I suspect you'll ever get to the bottom of it. I understand that because I remember reading Alexander Tom's book about archaeoastronomy when I was a teenager, and I live quite near Arborough in Derbyshire, and I used to, again, it's like the man, I'd often go there and just absorb it, just try to understand it. It's wonderful to have that magnet to pull you back there. Yeah, but just to the others listening, if you've got any questions, if you wouldn't mind, if you could just enter them into the chat, and we can pick them up and ask Andrew. But if I get the ball rolling a little, do you think there is any sort of absolute truth in dowsing, if you like? Let's say with respect to this site, for example, or is it just a constant play? Is it just a constant exploration in one's mind? Is there a truth?
I think it's a great question. I think there are certain things we can clearly come to agree on, and one thing is those energy lines coming down the hill. I think any sort of energy dowser is going to find those. You might have sort of quibble over dates of how long they've been. One of the odd things I asked when I got those, what I'm calling glyphs, was basically, would anyone else find them? And the kind of response I got from the spirit of the place was, no, this is how I am communicating them to you. So I think someone else would go on site and, if you like, get their own glyphs. So they get their own interpretation of what's going on, picking up what they're talking about. But I still feel there is a truth here. It may not be the hard and fast truth that you might get from a hard science, but it is the sort of truth that you'd get from the humanities and sort of something like history, but also, the truth that you'll get in a great work of art. And in some ways, for me, the Long Man of Wilmington is a great work of art. It's going to draw you back, and it's going to tell you something important and something profound every time you go there, just as you would every time you read a Dickens novel or Virginia Woolf, local hero. So I think that there's almost, this is a real philosopher's answer, I'm sorry. There's different levels of truth here, or different senses of truth. And I think we are in that conversation. It's interesting to see how other people respond to the site as well, and not get dogmatic about your own hold on it, and feel your own perspective being enriched and developing.
Would you say if it's I think this might be a helpful analogy. It's more like a sort of a two-way mirror. So you when you look at them in the two-way mirror, you might see a reflection of yourself. So that's your own beliefs, and your own unconscious beliefs or whatever, or conscious beliefs. But you also you're also seeing superimposed on sort of a deeper reality behind the mirror. Is that, I sometimes think that's a useful analogy. Is that something?
I think that's a classic thing. Any decent historian or archaeologist will tell you that history and archaeology probably tell you more about the present than they do about the past. And I think it's still similar. Often dowsing will tell you more about a dowser than they will the thing they're dowsing.
Yeah.
And I think that can be important, because dowsing can then be a process of self-discovery, and therapy sounds a bit profound, at the top. But I think dowsing is self-exploration as well as exploration of that big world out there.
I just finally, sorry, I don't want to hog it, but it seems to me that our consciousness extends outside of ourselves and impregnates features as well. So we could almost say, we know this, don't we? We know we can through our thoughts we can make dowsable, so we call energies or whatever, patterns. And so that does complicate it rather, doesn't it? about what the subsequent dowser comes along to the site, and are they picking up something that the previous person's left behind, or it's terribly complicated, isn't it? It seems to me.
I think that's definitely that kind of problem, that little platform, as I said. Which
yes. Yeah.
How much has actually been put there, and how much is authentic or primal?
So we've got just moving on now. I've got a question from Susan Pine. From some angles, the two staves could point towards a point in the southern sky. Andrew, did you notice any significant astrological features? And were there any, for example, 6,000 years ago? So,
firstly, hello, Sue. It's great to see you again. I haven't seen you for ages.
Hello, Andrew.
Nice to meet up with our friends here. Right. I think it's a wonderful idea, and no, I haven't yet. I always think this sort of astronomical dowsing strikes me as incredibly complex, and I have to go out there and get star maps and stuff like this, and which I'm less comfortable with. But I think it's a great idea that, does it actually sort of point to certain constellations or certain constellations at certain times of the year? And it's a lovely suggestion, which I will explore, and if anyone else wants to explore, I'd be delighted to hear what they have to say. I think there's certainly some interesting ideas about how the sun moves around the site, because it's always kind of had that, if it was a green man originally, then it did rely on shadows being cast across it to make it appear. So it was probably an image which appeared much more strongly during the summer, when you got that strong eastern sunrise and western sunset, and would kind of disappear in the winter. So it is sort of kind of reflecting seasons, certainly, but it'd be interesting to find out, especially where those leys actually line up onto constellations, and that might sort of strengthen that understanding of what it's doing there. And it's interesting that that first image I showed you from Eric Revilius has kind of the constellation of Taurus charging across the top of the site. So, maybe Revilius has got an intuition there, which I can learn from.
Yeah, just scrolling back through the comments, I noticed from Karen Granger, said the original drawing from the 17th century seemed to have bigger thighs and a more female figure. So head 2 seems to have a hairstyle, possibly with coils at the other side. So she just makes that comment.
That's a really interesting thought, because there's been a lot of debate about whether the man, in scare quotes, had hair or a helmet. But as far as none of the literature I've come across that asks whether it's a male or female hairstyle, and that idea that it is actually a long woman with long female hair or coiled hair is a really interesting one, which I think, is worth investigating, worth thinking about a lot more. Yeah, thank you very much for that. It's a brilliant idea.
Yeah. Will you be writing this up for an article for Dowsing Today, by any chance?
Probably, yeah. I think sort of Grace, wherever she's gone, will be telling me to and sort of pushing me to.
Yeah, I really think you should if you find the time. Yeah.
It's sort of contracting it enough to actually fit into the page.
Perhaps we have to, because we've got one article which we're printing over. I think it's maybe 3 editions. So don't feel that you have to contract it to fit one edition. We can spread it over multiple ones. But we're always, this goes to everybody listening. We always need articles for Dowsing Today, and so I'd encourage everybody to think about it, submitting something. Yeah. I don't see any more questions. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So I think from our namesake, Nick Hayward, can you unmute yourself? I'm not sure. That's to unmute.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
One of the things I was fascinated by, in a sense, was something that your talk didn't talk about at all, because I have a memory from reading Watkins that the staves were like the surveyor's poles for bringing about intervisibility. So if you've got you're here and over there is another town, but you can't draw a line because the hill's in the way. So one of you goes up with a finger there, and then the other goes up with a finger there, and you keep jiggling them about until you can see point A and point B, and you've got these two intermediate points on a straight line. I mean, is that still your understanding of what the staves are about?
Yeah, very much. I think that's a really neat description, said that because I suppose even now, but especially if you think back to this kind of period that Watkins thinks that the leys were laid down, there would have been a lot more tree cover. So a lot of this area would have been forested. So you'd need something quite artificial.
Like, can I ring you back?
Yeah, yes, yeah. You go.
Okay. Could I ring you back, Marilyn?
We're getting stuck.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm back.
Yes. Right. Yeah, so I think it would be that problem that you would need something like a stave, at night I suppose a torch, to actually just make yourself stand up, not just on the landscape, but above trees or whatever else is going on. So presumably, the idea would be for Watkins, you're commemorating his dodman possibly standing up on the top of Windover Hill. So you've got a clear sight from where the Priory now is, or where the yew tree in the church is, and also getting you on the other side of the hill to the other, that ley goes through various tumuli and burial mounds as you go down towards the coast. So yes, you'd certainly need something like that. And in a way, the Long Man is quite a nice image of what Watkins' dodman would have been doing and the tools they'd have had. So yeah, I very much, I like that idea, even if it's just a sort of illustration. Yeah.
I mean, you had to put the long poles near the top of the hill, so you could see point A and point B, and then another pole so you could see point B and the first stave, so you could bring them
see on the other side of the hill. Yeah, because precisely, I suppose for Watkins, precisely by having that figure on a hillside, is emphasizing precisely the point you're making.
Right.
Yeah, because also, just talking about, we've got the Long Man on the north-facing side of the Downs. I'm just wondering whether, with a fairly exhausting bit of dowsing, you might be able to pin down whether there's a corresponding figure on the south side, whether there's any south-facing parts of the Downs, which could have also taken some sort of figure, obviously now lost. And it is sort of thing, as you're sort of walking around the Downs, to speculate, what might be missing there.
Because in a way, with my thesis on what I think Watkins was saying, you don't have one man with two poles, you have two men with one pole each, as it were, to get the intervisibility.
Yeah, I suppose this one is symbolically straddling those two poles. It's kind of straddling the ley.
Not really, I think.
I noticed from the comments that the idea that it's a long woman is, attractive to a lot of people. I'm pleased by that. That's. I noticed another Nick Hayward, who's Grace, is waving her hand furiously.
Okay.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Hi, Andrew. It was a tremendous talk. Thank you very much. And I felt that very much this figure of the Long Man may be connected to time, which you have already mentioned in your presentation. So maybe 6,000 years ago, the Long Man was created to show that the Earth's energy are going through those stuffs. And in a way, the message was, I am here and I can dowse. I'm using Earth's energy. Look, there are two stuffs going along the side, the Earth's energy. Then maybe 4,000 years ago, or rather 2,000 years ago, the inhabitants of this place, human inhabitants, decided that this place is very much about sun energy. So that's the Taurus. And they slightly changed the image of the Long Man to correspond to the sun energy. And then maybe, let's say, you mentioned Roman period, that this was very much, and maybe it's Roman and Christianity period, that the sign began to reflect the duality of man and woman and duality in nature, of female and masculine principles, as you found those different spirals. And I definitely also feel that the left side of the Long Man, so the right side from us, but the Long Man's left side is more rounded, more feminine, and maybe in that time, in that period of time, this is what people concentrated on, and maybe even they slightly changed the Long Man to reflect their ideas and their beliefs. And then later on, let's say past medieval Renaissance, maybe it was all about the Earth goddess, and somehow the image was modified to reflect the presence of the Earth goddess in the landscape.
I think that's very true. I think one of the things that I'm getting through those supposed glyphs I found is, well, I took it that in a way that sort of middle glyph, the Middle Ages one, which is just the sort of straight lines to the boring one, that almost reflected, if you like, a loss of interest or trivialization of the Long Man. So, you know, it's a high point of Christianity, the old religion of the witches, as Lethbridge has it, has been pushed to one side, it's been persecuted. Much more interest in worship of goddesses and Diana in the Roman period. So the Romans and before have got a more elaborate. And maybe that sort of more elaborate image I got for today is just an indication that there is a greater awareness of the need for a more matriarchal religion, a worship of an Earth Mother, the Earth. And so the glyphs certainly changing. And as you say, I suspect that the image of the Long Man itself changes as well. I worry that the modern Long Man has been stopped being a proper sort of ancient image and become more a logo. It works incredibly well on beer glasses. There's a Long Man brewery, you know, you can get a Long Man pint. And it looks great because it just looks like a modern logo. And it's been kind of frozen, be a philosopher, technical term is reified. It's been turned into a thing. It's been tidied up. The vitality, the rawness, the contradictions have been taken out. And it's just become this comfortable little image you find on your beer glass or wherever. And so, yeah, I think you know, there's lots of levels going on, and the glyphs are a way to get into what's going on underneath the surface and the vitality of the site, as it were. Grace is going to come back to me on that.
Just following from what you were saying, that it would be maybe a good idea to investigate Long Man in time, very much in time, because we know as dowsers we can dowse at a specific era, which you have started doing. So let's say medieval times, Roman times, etc. And the other reflection is this: in the past, people actually own the place. It's not like now when we're moving around, you know, changing homes, etc. And in the past, if people lived around the place, there was an ownership of the area. And as with the ownership, with the feeling of ownership, maybe they felt that they have the right to change the Long Man to reflect their beliefs and to reflect their situation.
That's actually interesting, because that would link to what I was saying about that sort of tension between Wilmington and Windover Hill and Fell Beacon. Maybe they are simply different communities. And I think that would be an interesting thing to explore. And maybe those communities, their belief systems changed at different rates and there was a tension between them. I'd like to,
May I?
We'll start working on them Sunday, probably.
May I butt in here, please?
Yeah, please.
I've got a couple of thoughts. Hi, Grace. I'm seeing you for ages. Nice to see you. And you too, Andy. A couple of things occurred to me. I think there's mileage in exploring what was going on in 6000 BC at that stage. I like Grace's idea of it relating to the sun energy, because the figure's facing north. And if you look at the figure, you're going to see the sun in the southern sky over the top. And I'm also remembering, I think it's in one of Peter Knight's books, that I think the Southern Cross was still just about visible in UK skies around about that time. So it might be that from a certain angle, if you're on the ground, those two lines might point you towards some sort of point in the sky. And maybe that was the Southern Cross. I mean, I just put a huge question mark over this. It's something to investigate. But there we go. We all throw ideas into the pot, don't we?
It's a great idea, yeah. I shall see what but yeah, I do like that. Yeah, and that also that image of having the sun above the Long Man, precisely because it's north facing orientation. Yeah. I think there's a lot going on of that whole, if you like, the position of the Long Man in the cosmos, which still needs untangling and still needs looking at. Well,
I noticed we're coming up to near 9 o'clock, but does anybody have any questions that they just, well, sorry, just raise your hand and we'll. Nobody? Well, it's getting a little late, so shall we end there? And as I say, I'll post this to all who remain. Do go to the YouTube channel, and you'll find an increasing number of videos on different topics up there, and all the Zoom talks will be posted up there in due course. As I've edited them.
Could I just interject?
Sure.
Okay, thanks. I'd just like to thank Andrew for your presentation. Brilliant, really enjoyed it. You've done a tremendous amount of work in preparing that PowerPoint. So we do appreciate that. Thank you. It's great to see what you're doing in Lewis as well with your dowsing group. I think they are missing you in Cardiff. There is a bit of a vacuum there, and it'd be nice to start another group. So if you're ever coming back to Wales, you'll always be welcome in the hillside. Okay.
No, thank you.
Yeah. And as you saw, there were quite a lot of Nick Haywoods on the street tonight. It was a bit like the Matrix, wasn't it? And I thought, yeah. And just a word from our sponsors. We're running an international dowsing event again on Sunday, and I noticed Brenda is here from Vancouver. Nice to see you, Brenda. Thanks for coming. We've I don't know if you know the president of the Canadian Dowsing Society, Shannon. I think she's called Shannon, and also other people will be helping us host the event when it comes to your timeline, and we're looking for assistance from other timelines as well around the world. So that's something to look out for on Sunday. That's a 24-hour marathon Zoom call. That brings me on to the conference. We've got the conference coming up now on the 23rd, 24th of September. Again, that's going to be broadcast. So if you can't come to the conference, you'll be able to purchase a ticket to buy it to watch it as it's broadcast or watch the videos after the event. You'd be very welcome to do that. But as Nick said, this video will be available to view on the YouTube channel, and so if you do download the PowerPoint presentation, I think it's still worth looking at the video again, because it brings it all to life, doesn't it? It's very, very good. So thank you, Andrew. I'll close there now, and thank you all for coming. Nice to see you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Andrew, thanks everybody. See you soon.
Thank you very
Bye.
much
Bye,
indeed. Thank you.
Bye.